5:30, and that's when we typically start. So thank you all, hearty souls. I see some faces I haven't seen recently, despite the fact that we know we have a bit of COVID going around. And if you have a mask, it might not be a bad idea to put it on to help others feel more comfortable. If not, then spread yourselves around so you do feel you're sufficiently socially distanced. And I see some more people coming in, so I'll let you find chairs. No, that's fine. I'll sit right there. All right, tonight is the 5th program in our summer series for 2024. And we have all 4 programs that have been recorded, posted on the islesboroforum.org website. So please, I encourage you and your friends and acquaintances to make use of those. I know some thought last week's speaker might have been a little bit hard to grasp all of his words. So take another look, because that was a fascinating subject that we had on the U.S. naval strategy in the South China Sea. So let me just repeat a few of my usual general announcements. One is that we welcome your contributions. There's a tiny little basket over there, which you could put a contribution in. We think in terms of $10 per program, adjusted up or down depending upon your circumstances. And we will be recording this program and posting it within about 5 days, so you'll have it as well to refer to. And with those, I haven't identified myself. I'm Gail Jackson, and I'm the moderator for this evening. But as you can see, we have a well-populated panel to help us with our very important topic tonight, which has to do with local, not-for-profit, online news reporting. So I'd like to give you a little background on the particular entity that we're going to be focusing on, the Maine Monitor. I think it's fair to say that local news is under crisis across the United States. Daily newspapers are dying here in Maine. Dailies like the Portland Press Herald and the Bangor Daily News have been gutted and are shadows of their former selves. The newspaper business model is imperiled. There's so much news that's free online, and advertising dollars have gone to social media platforms like Google and Facebook. Nearly 3,000 newspapers have closed since 2005. Too many communities across the United States lack sources of trusted information about what's happening around them. Study after study shows that when that happens, when people don't get the high-quality, nonpartisan, accurate, and reliable news that they need to be informed and engaged citizens, we become more polarized as a nation, as people stay at home and watch relentlessly one-sided news channels such as Fox News and MSNBC. Also, in the absence of trusted news sources, disinformation and misinformation increases. Local news provides our communities with a shared understanding of what's happening in our state houses, city halls, schools, and businesses. It also demands accountability of community, business, and governmental institutions. But there is a revival happening in local news. Across the United States, nonprofit local newsrooms are filling the void created by the decline of the commercial newspaper industry. Examples include the Texas Tribune, the Vermont Digger, and Mississippi Today. Citizens in these communities are realizing that local news is a civic good, that journalism must be supported philanthropically, the same way hospitals, museums, libraries, the ballet, and opera are supported. And the Maine Monitor is one small but mighty newsroom doing its part. We are fortunate tonight to have 4 representatives of the Maine Monitor, 3 in person and 1 via Zoom. Our Zoom participant is Micaela Schweitzer-Bluhm, Executive Director of the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting, which publishes the Maine Monitor. Before holding this position, she was a member of the Foreign Service, serving in the Middle East and Southeast Europe. She has degrees from Brown University and the National War College. I will turn the program over to Micaela to introduce her panelists. Micaela is coming to us via Zoom because she has COVID, so she's appearing despite that fact. And at this point, there she is, Micaela. Wonderful to see you. And I'm going to turn it over to you. Just a minute, Micaela. Hold. No. No.
Turn your volume up.
Yeah. Of what you
Okay. Thank you.
We can launch.
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you for inviting the Maine Monitor to participate in this Islesboro Forum. She said I was very much looking forward to being there, but summer COVID caught me, and I apologize for not being there. Taking my place, though, is me, Nick Mills, one of our staunchest board directors and champions of nonprofit in-depth journalism for Maine. You don't need to know all this stuff about me. Before I want to share some exciting news that came out on Friday. The Maine Press Association announced it will induct our founders, John Christie and Naomi Shalit, into the Maine Press Hall of Fame. Yay. We are thrilled to see that their contributions to journalism in Maine recognized, and they have made really great contributions. They were at the forefront of nonprofit news in Maine, and we here are honored to continue their mission to deliver deeply reported nonpartisan news for Maine. It's a testament, their recognition in the hall, testament to the role that Maine Monitor plays in Maine's new ecosystem. Our reporting is unique in Maine. We're investigative. We're dedicated to revealing issues, challenging our state, thoroughly detailing facts involved, and profiling solutions. The journalism that we do is grounded in very careful reporting, factual analysis, interviews with real people who are identified, and civil, respectful coverage. We don't rush stories, and as Kate will tell you, she publishes stories only when they are thoroughly researched and fact-checked. Our stories populate our paywall-free website and our free newsletters because we share the Maine Monitor reporting freely, and all of our stories are reprinted when they're reprinted and aired on local radio and television. They get it all for free. We value the partnerships that we have with Maine news organizations, and we're very honored that our colleagues recognized John and Naomi and our nonprofit news organization in this way. It's very lovely because this is our 15th anniversary. I hope you enjoy this deep dive into our work, specifically our rural reporting. And Mika says she's going to stay on the case. I don't know if she's going to be lurking behind the screen or not, but let's assume that she is. And I mean, for me, what a treat to come to Islesboro to substitute for Mika Schweitzer-Bluhm, who I have the greatest possible respect for. And I'm really sorry that she has come down with COVID. I know she wanted to be out here herself. So on we go. This is the point where Mika introduces me. Thank you, Nick. Each year in this country, more communities find themselves without a functioning news outlet. In its November 2023 report, the Northwestern University Medill Local News Initiative cautioned that the number of local news outlets continued to decline very steeply, even steeper in 2023 than in past years. The U.S. remains on the current trajectory. By the end of this calendar year, nationally, we will have lost 1/3 of our newspapers since 2005. That's a lot of newspapers. Maine is not immune. 6 in 10 Maine newspaper publishing jobs were cut between 2000 and 2018. Without local journalism to bring issues to light and hold lawmakers and others accountable, research shows that citizens are less engaged, voter participation declines, and corruption increases, and polarization too, as was pointed out. So Naomi and John became particularly concerned about the decline in investigative reporting, which is sort of the highest calling of journalism. You know, Maine, the First Amendment, let's put it this way, journalism, the press, the only commercial enterprise specifically protected by the Constitution of the United States in the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of the press. And so it's very important that the press does investigative journalism to hold the feet to the fire of the other three. You know, they're the fourth estate. The press is the fourth estate, the other three being executive, judiciary, and legislative. And the investigative part of the journalistic mission is the hard part, the expensive part, the time-consuming part, and that's why it has declined most precipitously in newspapers all over the country, including in Maine. So John and Naomi also committed to making all of the reporting free to readers, free to all the main news outlets, free republication. Their goal was to support local news organizations with free content. Not only serve readers, but also help Maine's struggling news ecosystem, and that continues to be our commitment. We are a statewide, nonprofit news organization. We report on government accountability, public health, climate and environment, and Maine's people, to name a few topics. We focus on investigative and explanatory journalism. Our mission is to ensure that people are fully informed about what's happening in the state of Maine so they can participate and connect and create a better Maine. In 2023, Maine Monitor reporting led state lawmakers to demand more intensive oversight and frequent reviews of guardianships. Maine Monitor reporting prompted the Maine Commission on Indigent Legal Services to put forth a plan to create a statewide network of public defender offices. Maine Monitor reporting encouraged lawmakers to adopt a bill changing state mineral mining laws. And in 2022, we became concerned about the growing problem of news deserts in Maine. Somerset County has no dedicated news outlet. Piscataquis and Waldo counties have one weekly each. Washington County has 2 weeklies, both in the southern coastal area, leaving much of the county, large county, without any journalism. So we began to dedicate reporting to Maine's rural communities, which have lost historic local papers, and they're underserved by Maine's larger legacy news organizations. The Bangor Daily News, for example, used to have bureaus all over the state of Maine. Now they have just a handful of reporters in the rural areas, and reflective of their staff reduction from 400 to 99. Yeah. We started our work in Washington County last year and added dedicated coverage to Franklin, Somerset, and Oxford counties too. So to talk more about this, I'm joined by our editor, Kate Koff, and one of our reporters, Emmett Gartner, who spent the last year dedicated to that rural reporting beat. Kate, let me go to you first. As the editor and also a lifelong and 8th generation Mainer, can you talk about why dedicated reporting focused on these rural areas is so important? Remember what I taught you about microphones?
I just learned how to hold a microphone properly right before we started. Well, thank you, first of all, so much for having us. We're really grateful to be here and such a beautiful place. And I'm also very grateful that all of you came out on this gorgeous Sunday afternoon. As Nick mentioned, I have lived here most of my life, and I grew up in Portland, which does, have a community newspaper still, thankfully. But I think there are sort of two reasons why rural reporting is particularly important. The first is something that both Nick and Gail talked quite a bit about, which is that we really have seen the gutting of these, hyper-local news outlets in the last 15 or 20 years. I mean, growing up in Portland, we got the Portland Press Herald every day, and I watched it as it just became slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. And it made me really quite sad. I mean, we just saw the drop-off of so much really important news. And I think in the absence of a dedicated news outlet and a sort of centralized source of vetted information, we do see this, see this proliferation of misinformation that we've seen that really has profound effects on our democracy and the way that we engage with each other in our communities. So, I would say that's the first reason. And I think the second reason is that there are a lot of stereotypes about people in rural communities. And in many cases, they are perpetuated by national media that sort of parachutes in oftentimes and leaves with an incomplete picture of the people who live in these places. And I see it as one of our jobs to really push back against some of that information and to provide a full and nuanced picture of the people who live in rural places. I live in Bar Harbor. It's not really a rural place, but I have lived in, very small towns in Maine of 400 people. And the communities that I found there, as I'm sure you all know about this place that you love, are just so different than I think they are portrayed oftentimes. And so I really see it as part of our mission to tell these deeper, fuller stories of these places. And I think that's one of the ways that we will get back to having just more respectful conversations on the whole, on the state level and the federal level. That's a really lofty goal, but yeah.
And Emmett, you came to Maine last year from the state of Maryland, and you were immediately asked to work out in the tall grass, out in the rural areas of Maine, in western Maine, a new beat for you, a new beat for the Maine Monitor. So how did you go about it? How did you go about building the kind of ties and relationships in western Maine that need to know what needed to be covered and know the people to talk to?
Hello. Good to be with you all tonight. So I think it helped that in coming here, I was coming from a daily newspaper in Western Maryland, which has some overlaps in terms of the communities that Western Maine has. I was reporting on largely rural communities, attending monthly town council meetings where only a few people would show up, and if there wasn't a reporter in the room, there wouldn't be any record really of what had happened. So I took that mindset with me when I started this position in Maine. And with that, I had the guidance of our former editor, David Dahl, who really encouraged me to just get out there and kind of, even though we're not a daily news outlet, attend local meetings, municipal meetings, meet people in attendance, and speak with them and focus on the topic in hand, yes, but also, this is what we're taught in journalism school. I always end my interviews asking what people care about and what issues they don't think are being adequately covered in the news today. So doing that just branches out from one story to another, and if you follow that, you really start to get a better handle of what issues are important to people. And more than anything, even if that doesn't result in a story itself, it's just good to be listening, because oftentimes there aren't those ears there.
Thanks, Emmett. Kate, one of the issues you have focused on has been the struggle of smaller communities to plan for rapid growth and the consequences of the lack of planning on other issues around the state. So tell us a bit about this, flagpole, aqua farms, housing, et cetera. I have to skip rope again. We've got to figure out a way to get around this. There you go.
Yeah, so before I was the editor, I served as the environmental reporter and the energy reporter. And one of the things I heard consistently from people, sort of no matter what story I was covering, and the environment is a great beat because you can really make the argument to your editor that it's just about anything. You can write about anything you want because it's all about the environment. But one of the things I heard consistently was that these small communities were really struggling with some larger projects that they had, that had been brought forward. I'm thinking in particular, I'm sure you've all heard of the plan to launch rockets from Steuben, which is, was a really interesting plan. We have obviously several proposals for large aqua farms up and down the coast. And because of Maine's home rule, which really gives local communities a lot of say over their planning and development, you have, planning boards and select boards of just a few people who are, I have a lot of family who serves in town government. They are, dedicated and knowledgeable, but that knowledge, hits a limit when you're trying to figure out whether or not you should permit somebody to launch rockets off your coastline. So yeah, that was one of the things that I heard consistently. And I wrote a big long piece where I interviewed a number of folks in county government across the state. And they said, we really feel like we need more resources at the state level to help us plan for these projects. And I would say that one of the a really great example of Maine Monitor reporting where we are able to sort of do things that no one else has been doing is, not sure how many of you are aware of the Flagpole of Freedom, which was a proposed development up in Washington County. So this development, I'll back up a little bit. I read a press release from the family that had planned this development. It was a very prominent family in Washington County. They run the Wreaths Across America nonprofit, and they place wreaths on Arlington Cemetery every year. They're very well known for that. And they came forward with a proposal to put a $1 billion Patriot-themed, Patriot theme park in just north of Columbia Falls, which is a town of 496 people. And a massive development. I mean, we're talking like it would have had a fire department and an emergency services department and roads and gondolas and museums. Huge, huge development in Maine. And, they brought this to the planning board, which is through a little bit of maneuverability, but they were planning to bring this to this planning board of 3 volunteers. And so I read the press release about this, and there had been a tiny bit of reporting on it in the local paper, but it was essentially just a reiteration of the press release. And I thought, this is a wild proposal. This is fascinating. So I was able to, go up, and I spent some time with Rob Worcester, who's the one of the co-founders of the park and the son of the patriarch who runs the operation. And I wound up writing a number of pieces, one of which was in collaboration with Time Magazine about this proposed development. And it ultimately, I think it really got people in the community a lot more engaged. I mean, before we did the reporting on it, there was maybe a handful of people who came to these meetings, and afterward the meetings were just packed. They had them in the high school gym. And I think that this is a great example of exactly the kind of work we should be doing, and exactly the kind of work that the Monitor can bring forward. And, Columbia Falls has no local news outlet. So the rumor mill really ran wild. I mean, most people were just getting their information off Facebook or from this press release. And I think that our reporting really changed the way that people were thinking about this development and whether or not it was right for their community. And it was ultimately they withdrew the project. We have no stake or say in it, but it was an interesting outcome to sort of follow through. So yeah, I think that's one of the ways in which we can really shine.
So I don't know if you remember, but last winter we had a couple of serious storms. And Emmett, in the aftermath of those storms, you did a lot of reporting on recovery, business recovery, and emergency response. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, so I focused initially more so on the aftermath of the December floods in central and western Maine. And I started off by going to the town of Gartner and kind of canvassing local businesses there to see how they were recovering afterwards, because we had heard from a couple business owners that they had been struggling to follow through with their insurance policies and get reimbursed for the damages. And what I had found there initially is present across the state is just a kind of misunderstanding of building insurance versus flood insurance. Not much of Maine has flood insurance coverage, which is the only thing that will come in and help you when your basement is flooded and your refrigerators are floating around, bumping into your oil tank, your heating oil tank. So there was that aspect to it. And also just generally across everyone I spoke with, there was really a lack of understanding of how severe and how quick that flood would come. I heard a lot of similar stories of people like ambling around in their basements or cellars when the flood water was already at their hips before they knew how bad it would get, and really scrambling to save what they could. So with that, it just kind of had my mind spiraling further. If this is the future scenario with climate change, where there will be more increased flooding in frequency and also in severity, how are communities going to prepare for it? So that kind of led me to that next vein of what are counties or towns doing to warn their residents when the floodwaters are rising, where to go, which roads to avoid, places where they can go for resources or food or water. And there just really isn't that network there. As Kate kind of touched on, these county emergency management agencies, which are the connection between towns, fire departments, and then the state, they're only staffed by 1 or 2 people. And oftentimes their directors are people who have retired and then were replaced, and then the person who replaced them leaves, and all of a sudden they need to bring someone back in. Who's there? Oh, there's the director who retired. You know, he's coming back at it. So I've just been reporting that out and really trying to get an understanding of the preparation going into both those warning systems and also infrastructure, roads and whatnot. And yeah.
Well, that segues right into dams. Maine has about 1,000 dams. Many of them are old. Some of them are in rather precarious condition. And so you started focusing on those dams and rivers, speaking of floods.
Yeah, it's all connected. I mean, just the way Maine's geography is, and the towns were built on these rivers and used dams to harness the power that then powered the mills that all the local economies were based on. And those dams are still around, and they have a heavy influence even today, even if they're not being used to generate power on the geography around them. And I really started off with Dover Foxcroft, which has a defunct dam which hasn't generated power in a couple of decades. And although each dam kind of has different purposes, some actually reduce flooding, others are used to block ice flows, others, as you know, are used to generate hydroelectricity. This one had just been there stagnant, and it increases flooding in the impoundment, that icy area behind the dam. And during the December flooding, it caused significantly higher waters than the town would have seen had the dam not been there. So that culminated in this, even before that, there's just years-long studies about the influence of the dam and how much it would cost to either remove it or repair it to keep it up to federal standards. They ultimately found that it would be cheaper to get rid of it, and they put it to a town vote, whether to pay millions or to fix it, or to take up grant money to get rid of it and also reduce that flood risk. And the town voted to keep it and to spend that money out of pocket, because this dam, and as is the case for many other towns, this dam is just ingrained into the lifeblood of this community. People talk about how tourists only stop in town because they have this beautiful view of the dam, and they're used to the river level behind it where their homes are built. So it's a great kind of microcosm for everything else about Maine's dams, because some have voted to get rid of their dams. Farmington, their dam on the Sandy River, that's gone, and the river's changed since then. But it's just kind of this really intricate relationship that everywhere has with them. And these decisions are gonna increase as the dams get older. The state and federal government requires them to be held to, certain standards. So towns are gonna have to make these decisions, think about how it overlaps with climate change or influence on flooding. Also, their value of sea-run fish like Atlantic salmon, who swim up rivers and go and spawn in the headwaters that are being affected by these dams. So it's really just, again, this question that I've always been curious is, how do communities prepare and make these decisions in the long run, and what's important to them, and how that fuels whatever decision they ultimately go with.
Thanks, Emmett. Kate, you got other reporters on the staff. Let's hear about some of them and the work that they've been doing on the Maine Monitor.
Yes, yeah, we have a wonderful staff of reporters focused on a variety of issues, as Gail mentioned. I think we're certainly very well known for our climate and environment reporting, but we are also very well known for some of the reporting that we've done on the opioid settlement money. So I'm not sure if folks are aware, but there was a $55 billion national settlement against pharmaceutical companies recently, and that money was doled out to the states. Maine got about $235 million to spend over the course of 20 years. That's a lot of money for the state of Maine. And only about half of that money is subject to public reporting requirements, which means that the other half of the money, which was distributed in partially to the Attorney General's office and partially to municipalities and counties and other entities around the state, the other half of that money, about $118 million, there's really very little oversight of. So one of our reporters, our healthcare reporter, Emily Bader, has been focused for the last few months on tracking that money, which is a big undertaking. And that is, but it's exactly what the Maine Monitor is meant to do. She has spent hours and hours just digging through documents and talking to dozens of people and trying to figure out, how are these places going to spend this money, which is supposed to go to, improving the lives of people affected by the opioid crisis. So I think that's a really important Monitor project that if you haven't looked at it, I would urge you to read it. And then I think another piece of reporting that we're really quite well known for, as Gail mentioned, is our reporting on indigent defense in the state. So Maine, up until January, was the only state in the nation without a public defender's office. And we did a project several years ago now with the investigative news outlet ProPublica, that looked at the attorneys, the private attorneys who were being hired to represent some of the most vulnerable people in the state who couldn't afford a lawyer. And what that investigation found was that a disproportionately high number of those attorneys had faced sanctions. In some cases, had some really serious issues on their records, felonies and sex crimes. And they were being allowed to represent some of Maine's most vulnerable people in court because we really had no other system. So I would say that our reporting is really credited with bringing about this change where Maine now does have a public defender's office. And it opened in January, and actually our reporter Josh Keefe, who is our government accountability reporter, got to spend several days with the folks in that office, and he did an excellent piece that really just laid out what the opening of that office means for public defense in Maine, how it will really change the strategy. And I think it was, it was an excellent, I would call it sort of solutions journalism, which is, obviously not, it's just what it sounds like, not just looking at the problem, but looking at some solutions to it. And that piece really illuminated, what a public defender's office can do for folks. So I think that was a wonderful outcome of some of this other accountability reporting we've done over the years. And then the last one I would mention is our healthcare reporter, Rose Lundy, has really focused on aging issues in Maine. She also just came off a year and a half long investigation with ProPublica as well that looked at assisted living facilities and how the state oversees those facilities where residents have wandered away. So in many cases, these are folks who have, Alzheimer, dementia, other memory issues. And there are rules around, how assisted living facilities are supposed to care for these people. And in several cases that Rose found, including one very sad incident in which a gentleman passed away, there were really very few sanctions or fines for the facilities that had a lapse in, had these lapses. And, Rose has continued to follow that issue. She's reported extensively on aging in Maine, which is, as we all know, one of the oldest states in the nation. And she had a great solutions piece out this week. Not all of her reporting is so dire. She had a wonderful piece that looked at a clinic in Aroostook County that is caring for folks with dementia, and in a place where, I think Maine has 36 geriatricians throughout the entire state and only 60 psychologists, 60 psychiatrists. It's really pretty dire. But her piece focused on what this community was doing and how they were sort of trying to bridge the gap with telehealth and these support groups on a weekly basis. So I think we do sort of the whole slate of topics. We cover them here, but those are just a few that I think stick out in my mind.
Great. Thank you, Kate. We'll get to your questions. I'm sure you have some. I hope you have some. Let me share first a little bit more about the organization as a nonprofit news organization. As a nonprofit, we depend on charitable support from foundations, individuals, to fund the operations. We keep our expenses low, and we focused on the work, our journalism. The nonprofit model is not a magic bullet. It's not the ultimate solution to save journalism. It requires hard work by Mika, who I wish she could have tuned in today, and Amelia, our development officer. They spent a lot of their time seeking grant funding and encouraging individual donations. We conduct 4 fundraising drives each year, and our goal is to someday raise enough money to secure operations for the coming fiscal year so we can deliberately plan for the year and focus on our operations for the coming year. We're not there yet. We still have to fundraise for our current year operations. We believe in transparency, accountability, both for our reporting and our fundraising. We share all of our policies, funding, and operational information on our website, mainemonitor.org. This sets us apart from other Maine news organizations, and as trust in news continues to be somewhat challenging, we believe this is important. So now, what do you want to know? Ask us anything. We're ready. Yes.
Given that I've been on this planet for a number of years, and I've lived most parts of the country in different places, big cities primarily, coming to an island like Islesboro with 600 and some people in the wintertime, it's been quite a change from metropolitan living, where news is quite available and information is quite available. Whether or not it's true is another question. The question I have for you all is, you're doing a wonderful job, and I believe in your mission. But what I don't understand is whether or not people much younger than I want the information that you're trying to give. Do they even care?
Wow.
Oh, good. I don't get to call myself young really anymore, but I'm youngish. Okay, all right. I would say they care. I think that we need to think really creatively about how we reach them. And we are really trying to do this, I would say I don't think that means sort of jumping on any social media platform that exists. We don't always just need to go to the next TikTok, but I do think that one of the ways that we can reach younger people who do primarily get their news through social media is we can sort of hook them with the beginning of an article or like a little blurb. And then I think, we do see that they will come to the website and they will read the longer pieces. I think also doing events, and we had an event actually last week at a brewing company in Ellsworth where we were accompanied by a wonderful guitarist and former New York Times reporter. So getting out in that way and just meeting people where they are, I think is a way to do it. And I would say, somebody said to me not too long ago, people age into news. And I think there is some truth to that. I think that once you do find your community and your more permanent place, that you start to pay more attention to, the people around you. And man, especially once you start paying taxes, then you pay a lot of attention, as you all know. So I think there's some truth to that as well. But I have hope. I know a lot of very engaged young people, and I know that they are very hungry for good, in-depth information. And I also think that they are pretty discerning, having grown up in the age of the internet, that they are pretty discerning when they see misinformation. Not all the time. We all, could use education on that front. But I think for the most part, they have a much better, media literacy than I do. I mean, that's something that's actually discussed in schools now, whereas, I was on the cusp of cell phone usage in high school, so that wasn't really part of my education. But I have hope. I have to have hope, I do this job and I really love this job. And I do see that people want this information. We just need to think really hard about how we meet them where they're at to give it to them. But it's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, I have hope too. I taught journalism at Boston University for a long time. And I was always encouraged by the number of young people who still want to become journalists. That was probably the most encouraging thing about doing that job, was there are still people interested in doing it and doing it right. So, the delivery systems have changed, and a lot about news presentation has changed, but I hope a lot of people are interested in knowing what really happens, and knowing and reading and listening to stuff that is accurate and fair and true.
I always find these questions kind of hard to grapple with, because as a journalist in representing this generation, obviously I read everything. Like I can't look away from news articles, and I can't say the same about all of my friends or other people my age. But I will say, I know that my generation is concerned about climate change, and in order to address that concern, or maybe kind of scratch an itch that's always, on the back of our neck, we like to read and know about what is going on, what solutions exist, where troubles and faults are, and how they can be addressed. So there is kind of that nagging desire to be up to date with that kind of thing, to think about our futures and what they might look like and how these issues can be addressed. And in general, I think there is still just enjoyment of good quality writing, regardless of age, and same with photographs and Something we were taught in journalism school, which I only graduated from a couple years ago, is to really increase our ability to visualize data and make charts, not just little bar graphs, but something more engaging that really puts things into perspective. And I think with a combination of those things, we can still grab onto the short attention span of my fellow Gen Xers.
There was another question over here.
Can you tell us, from your perspective, what different age groups use for mediums to get their news from?
I mean, I think I'm 26 years old, so I think people in their 20s mainly get it from their phone. They'll see something on social media and they'll click on it. That's not always the case. People who are interested in news, I think in general, have web pages that they go to and visit regularly, and the Maine Monitor is probably one of them, where if they know that we release in-depth reporting on a Sunday, they'll pull up our homepage and click away. But yeah, I mean, phone, that's the big one.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Steve Miller. I worked for newspapers when I first got out of college for a few years, and so I have some familiarity with what you do, and I want to first say that I really think very highly of the Maine Monitor. I think you do a good job in most respects. For the last 40 years, I've been the executive director at Hyperlocal Islands Trust, and in November of 2021, when I got a call from Hannah Pingree telling me that Sears Island was the site that would that came forward during the Market of April report that was about to be released as the best site for a offshore wind manufacturing and launching facility. We were really surprised. So because the year earlier there had been press that said they were looking at back. So we began to do some research, and we've been involved with discussions ever since. But our research revealed a couple of things. One was that there was, in the record, there were pretty clear indications explicit indications that the planners had considered Sears Island as the preferable location from the get-go, and that the offshore wind advisory group was, I'm getting to a question, was really, the purpose was not to be, getting public input, but was to promote a situation in which the governor could announce that Sears Island was the place. So I had this research, I had some research, a fair amount of research that indicated there was a real issue with government accountability, which is something that I understand. I know that the Maine Monitor is particularly interested in. Naomi Shalib was a friend of mine, still is a friend of mine. She worked on the Grassroots Environmental Board while I was president, and we got to know each other fairly well. And so I called, got in touch with Naomi. So what do you think about this being a Maine Monitor investigative journalist kind of subject? Well, you know, if you know Naomi, she asked me a whole bunch of questions. She didn't immediately say yes, but then she said, yeah, I really think that David Dahl, who was the editor at the time, would be very interested in this. I got in touch with David, and I never heard back. So there's this issue of government accountability and what the heck is going on with our government in terms of what is probably going to be the most expensive public works program in the state of Maine ever. I mean, we're talking $750 million right now. So there's that government accountability thing that I was hoping that I might convince you, or at least have you have a chance to comment on, as something in this broad area that the Monitor hasn't really looked at. We've had other issues or other reports that have been good, but not that. And then second, although, there's also a very big, broad climate change related issue. What site should be chosen based on climate change? And that's not being covered in the media, not very well at all. That's a bit of a deep dive, I get that. So I'm just wondering whether or not Maine Monitor is in any way thinking about or willing to contemplate diving into
This is all me. I think you and I have spoken, actually, Stephen. It might have been a few years ago now. So first, for full disclosure, my husband oversees the easement on Sears Island for Maine Coast Heritage Trust. So I actually did write a story a couple of years ago on that subject, for which I believe you and I spoke, and you shared some documents with me. The disclosure was at the bottom of the story, and after that story ran, I decided it was too close to home, and it really wasn't appropriate for me to cover it anymore. So I have stayed out of that. We do have a freelancer, Annie Ropiak, who's an excellent environmental journalist. She has covered the issue. We have written about it. She actually had a couple pieces that came out in the last month or so. The most recent piece was geared more toward a national audience. She wrote it for Grist, which is an environmental publication, and we republished it. Here's what I would say. Our role is to present as nuanced a picture as possible of the arguments on both sides. And I think, to your point, Stephen, and this is something that Gail and I were actually talking about just before we started, the siting of renewable energy is a really complex issue. I have actually covered this. I wrote a very long piece a few years ago about siting solar on farmland, and how there were a lot of farmers who were very concerned that, these south-facing sunny slopes were now covered in solar panels because it was just, much more economically efficient, and there were very few rules around that at the time. That is changing, and I think we are having those discussions more and more as a state and as a nation. But Gail and I were talking about this, and one of the things that a point that was made to me not too long ago was, for 30 or 40 years, the environmental movement in the United States, which largely focused on stopping building things, and for very good reason. There were all of these projects that had destroyed minority communities, and we had blown the tops off mountains, and we had really destroyed a lot of our natural resources. And now, I think in the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen a very rapid shift toward building things. We need to build a lot of things, and we need to build them really fast. And I think that in many cases, we are still figuring out the balance between, and still really trying to write our regulations properly to make sure that we do have this right balance between, getting up the renewable energy that we need, and making sure that we don't destroy really precious resources in the process. I don't know that we have that right balance. I think it's an ongoing conversation that we're going to be having over the next 15 years. But I would push back a little bit. I mean, I personally have written stories about citing renewables. It's one of the things that I wrote quite a bit about when I was the environmental reporter. I didn't write about Sears Island for the reason that I mentioned. But I did write other pieces. And we wrote about we did a deep dive into question 3 a couple of years ago on the ballot that would have changed our utilities into consumer-owned utilities, which I think is a huge part of the picture. So I think we have done some of that work, but I take your point, and I get where you're coming from. I think there could always be more. So, yeah.
Questions back there? Yes?
So I think a lot of people nowadays are very suspicious of the press and consider that they can't believe, that people get their prejudices involved in what they're printing and what they're reporting on, and even what they choose to report on. So how do you counter that? And what would your definition be of being unbiased? And how do you counter that kind of sentiment that people have towards the press?
Great question, thank you. Personally, when it comes to just speaking to someone on an individual basis, I think there's a lack of understanding of what the journalistic process is. So that's pretty much where I start. When I'm speaking with someone who might be a little bit hesitant to be quoted in a story, I just make sure that they have a foundational understanding of how it works, you know, what on the record is, what on background is, what off the record is, and establish those, you know, those certain sectors. And then from there, it's really just a conversation about the questions I have, and it really doesn't have to be too complex. And I think I still get this too, and I'm always surprised when I get it, even speaking with public officials, and I guess this is also kind of a symptom of the lack of newspapers regularly speaking with these officials, but not everyone is aware of the objective approach of journalism. When I explain the topic of a story I'm reporting out, I'll sometimes get the question of, so what's your angle? And I do not have an angle. I am researching a topic. I hope to hear from all sides and paint a picture of events that are unfolding. So I think the responsibility in some ways is on us, and it can be easily alleviated by just having that initial conversation and showing that I'm not trying to, you know, tilt the scale one way or another. I just want to hear you. I want to make sure that when you're speaking with me, you feel comfortable and you have a firm understanding of the way the conversation and interview will work. I'm not trying to catch you, you know, slipping up on something and, you know, saying something that you didn't mean. I want you to be fully informed of the interview process beforehand, because that is beneficial to everyone. And like I said, when that's explained, for the most part, that people get that and they trust you, and they know that I also explained that, you know, not only do I want to capture what you're saying correctly for your own good, but it's also tied to me as well, because if I, you know, improperly quote you or misconstrue what you said, that comes back to me as well. And I think sometimes people forget that we have that obligation to the truth, and we really do want to capture things as they are. So that's kind of where I go.
Any good piece of journalism has to withstand the test of rigorous fact-checking. And I used to tell my students, live in mortal fear of being wrong. Because once you are wrong, it comes to light, and then you're trusted less and less. And you say, well, that reporter got this wrong. Do I believe this story now, the next story by this reporter? So reporters are conscious of this, and they really do try to be accurate, factual, honest, unbiased. You know, everybody has biases. You try not to let them bleed through into your reporting. Kate?
Yeah, I would just say one last thing, which is that I think one of the ways that we restore trust in media is also by being very clear about where our money is coming from. And, you know, we're at a nonprofit news organization. Nonprofit news is not going to save journalism, but I think it may have the option to restore people's trust in it, because we can point to our website and we can say, look, here are all the people who gave us money. You can look up our financial filings. You can see who gave us this money and where it came from. And I think that is just so important. We have a level of transparency that is just not required of private news organizations. And so we can really always fall back on that, and I think that's also really important. When people have questions about that, I'm just like, look at our it is all on there. Anything you want to know, you know, we have ethics we have all of our ethics policies, all of these disclosures. It's all up there. We just showed you all of our financials. That's it. So I think that can go a long way as well.
I don't know if this was mentioned before, but we also never use anonymous sources. I know a lot of reporting does use anonymous sources, but any good reporter and any good publication will not use an anonymous source unless there are airtight guarantees that A, that source exists, and that anything that anonymous source tells us has to be double-checked and verified with at least one other source and possibly 2 or 3 other sources. You were beaten to the punch by other people back there. Sorry, Gail.
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to give a shout out to our little local paper. It's the Islesboro Island News, and the editor is, I think, not here because she's putting the paper together right now. But I think we can all attest to how important that newspaper is to our community.
My question is a backup, right in line with that. We do have a local paper here. It obviously operates on a completely different set of principles, let's say, that you guys do. It's not, doesn't deal into atomic energy in Aroostook County, but it is local news.
Yeah.
And it deals with all local problems. And then slightly more broad-based is what comes out of Rockport, Rockland,
Courier.
and we do get some news from them about things like Sears Island. But, so my question to you is, where are you drawing the line between you and these other smaller sources?
Well, as Kate, we try to support them. We try to support them. And any newspaper, any news outlet in the state can use all of our content free of charge. We share everything that we produce.
Well, so before I came here, I worked as a beat reporter for the Ellsworth American, which is a wonderful paper, and been around for 150 years. And I would say that we ran Maine Monitor stories pretty frequently. They were long, and we didn't always have the room in print, but it was fantastic. It was this free reporting that if we felt like it was relevant to the community of Ellsworth, we would put it right in there. So it's a really good question, and we do, yes. So we do provide all of our reporting for free, but we also work with local papers in a variety of other ways. So just as an example, right now, I'm actually in the middle of a collaboration with the Sanford Springvale News. They had a reporter who wanted to look at solar energy development in Sanford. And they came to us and they said, can you help us with sort of a statewide perspective on this? You've done a lot of work in this area. And so I have been working with this reporter for a few months now to help her, not only report out the story, but also add kind of a statewide layer to it. And so the end result, I think, will actually be 2 stories. They'll run one that has a little bit of a different top on it that's really specific to Sanford. And then we will run another story that's more of a statewide perspective, but also brings in the Sanford piece. So we work closely with them and in that regard as well. And we are actually in the middle of putting together an organization that would provide sort of back-end support, so not necessarily on the editorial side, but on the business side of things to these hyperlocal news organizations. Because I think one of the things that we have seen in speaking to a lot of these people is that, in many cases, these are very dedicated volunteers. I mean, we have one woman in Bar Harbor who runs this blog, and it's just, she and her husband doing all of this local news, and these people really need support, and they particularly need support on the business side. So we are trying to put together an organization that would help them in, sort of whatever knowledge sharing that we can provide. So that's another way we're doing it. But I've been told we're over time, so I'm going to stop talking about that. But I'm happy to talk about it more if anyone is interested.
Thank you, Kate and Emmett, and Gail, thank you for inviting us out to Islesboro to participate in this forum. This is a wonderful event. I think we're going to have to leave it there.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for our I do have a question, and I'll rephrase it as a hope. They threw up on the screen their 2023 revenue and expenditures. And I was going to ask how the trend line was going. I hope that this enterprise is gaining traction so that 2023 looks better than 2022 and earlier years, and that it continues to go up. This is desperately needed for well-informed citizens to know how to
We should have brought our own little basket.
Well, it's not too late. I think they can find you online. So let's hope for a good, healthy future for you folks. Yeah. And I do want to say a quick word about next week's program. Totally different. We're turning to a summer resident named Jonathan Becker, who has been a photographer for Vanity Fair for 30 years. He has seen celebrities up close and personal, more than you could ever possibly think of. And I understand he has a storehouse of anecdotes about those experiences, which should be very entertaining. So please join us for the last program of the season next Sunday. And thank you for coming tonight and for your good questions.
Yeah.